I waited 15 years to get my revenge, and it was everything I imagined it to be. When I was 12, my stepfather Garrett destroyed my life with a single lie. He told everyone I'd stolen his prescription painkillers and sold them at school. The truth? He was the one with the addiction, raiding medicine cabinets at family gatherings and stealing from his own patients at the dental practice. But he needed a scapegoat when the state board started investigating. I watched my world crumble in real time. My mother believed him instantly, her precious husband over her own daughter. The school expelled me within 24 hours. My few friends' parents banned them from seeing me. Worse, child services got involved. They placed me in foster care while they investigated whether my mother was fit to parent a drug dealer. The foster home was a nightmare. 3 other kids, all older, all angry. They called me names, stole my clothes, and made it clear I didn't belong. Meanwhile, Garrett played the concerned stepfather, visiting regularly with fake tears about how disappointed he was in me. "I just want to help her get clean," he'd tell the caseworker, shaking his head sadly. "This addiction has torn our family apart." The caseworker ate it up. Here was this respected dentist, trying to save his troubled stepdaughter. They extended my placement indefinitely. The first foster home belonged to the Wilsons, a couple who took in kids for the monthly checks. Mrs. Wilson looked at me like I was contaminated when I arrived with my single garbage bag of belongings. Their biological son, Trevor, was 16 and took pleasure in reminding me daily that I was unwanted. "Drug dealers here," he'd announce whenever I entered a room. "Hide your pills." I learned to eat fast because if I didn't, someone would steal my food. I learned to sleep with my shoes on because they'd disappear otherwise. I learned to keep my mouth shut because nobody wanted to hear from the problem child. The caseworker, Ms. Hendricks, visited monthly. She'd sit in the Wilsons' pristine living room, the one we kids were never allowed to use, and ask how I was adjusting. Mrs. Wilson would smile and talk about my behavioral issues, while I sat silently, knowing that speaking up would only make things worse. "She's struggling with authority," Mrs. Wilson would say, very defiant. "We're working on it." The truth was, I'd asked why I couldn't call my mother. Mrs. Wilson had slapped me and said my mother didn't want to talk to drug dealers. After 8 months, I was moved to the Morrison home because Trevor had started getting physical. The Morrisons were religious fundamentalists who saw my addiction problems as a spiritual failing. They made me pray for 3 hours every morning before school, asking God to cleanse the sin from my soul. "The devil got into you early," Mr. Morrison would say, making me kneel on rice while reciting Bible verses. "But we'll drive him out." I spent my 13th birthday on my knees in their basement, begging forgiveness for sins I'd never committed. The other foster kids, identical twins named Casey and Kelly, were too scared of the Morrisons to show me any kindness. We were all just trying to survive. The breaking point came when Mrs. Morrison accused me of seducing her husband because he'd looked at me during dinner. She cut off all my hair as punishment, saying I was tempting him with vanity. When I showed up to school bald and sobbing, a teacher finally called for an investigation. I was moved to my 3rd placement, the Hendersons, when I was 14. They were different, tired, but kind. Mrs. Henderson had been a teacher before becoming a full-time foster parent. She had 7 kids in the house at any given time, all damaged in different ways. "We don't fix kids here," she told me on my first night. "We just keep them safe until they can fix themselves." It was the first honest thing an adult had said to me in 2 years. I spent 2 years bouncing between foster homes. When I finally aged out at 18, I was hollow inside. My mother had chosen Garrett over me. She'd signed away her parental rights, claiming she couldn't handle a child with such serious problems. The aging out process was brutal. The state handed me a garbage bag with my belongings, a bus ticket to wherever I wanted to go, and a check for $500. That was it. 18 years old, no family, no support system, no real education, thanks to constantly changing schools. I chose Portland because it was far from everything I'd known. I slept in a homeless shelter for 3 weeks before finding a studio apartment that rented to someone with no credit history. I worked 2 jobs, cleaning offices at night and serving coffee during the day, while taking classes at community college. The other students looked so young, so carefree. They complained about their parents not sending enough money or their dorm rooms being too small. I sat in the back, exhausted from working 16-hour days, and listened to their problems with bitter amusement. My sociology professor, Dr. Chen, noticed I never spoke in class but always turned in exceptional papers. After class one day, she asked if I was okay. "You write like someone much older," she said, "like someone who's seen things." I almost broke down right there. It was the first time in years an adult had shown genuine concern for me. Dr. Chen became my mentor. She helped me apply for financial aid, connected me with campus resources, and slowly coaxed my story out of me. When I told her about Garrett and what he'd done, she was the first adult to believe me completely. "That man destroyed your childhood," she said quietly. "But he didn't destroy you. You're still here, still fighting. That takes incredible strength." She was the one who suggested forensic accounting. "You have a mind for details and a passion for justice," she said. "Maybe you can use those skills to help other people." I moved across the country and started over. Community college, then state university. I studied forensic accounting, learning to trace money, uncover financial crimes, dig through records that people thought were buried forever. I told myself it was for career prospects, but really I was training for war. The coursework came naturally to me. Numbers didn't lie the way people did. Financial records told stories that couldn't be manipulated or rewritten. When someone stole money, they left a trail that could be followed by anyone patient enough to look. I graduated summa cum laude and was immediately recruited by Klein & Associates, one of the most prestigious forensic accounting firms in the country. My colleagues were mostly men from wealthy families who'd gone to Ivy League schools. I was the only one who'd ever slept in a homeless shelter. but I outworked all of them. While they went to happy hours and networking events, I stayed late studying case files. While they complained about difficult clients, I developed a reputation for taking the cases no one else wanted, the messy, complicated ones that required months of meticulous investigation. She's like a machine, I overheard one partner say. Never takes shortcuts, never misses details. Cold as ice, but incredibly effective. They were right about the cold part. I'd learned early that emotions were a luxury I couldn't afford, but that coldness served me well in forensic accounting. I could look at the worst financial crimes, embezzlement from children's charities, fraud targeting elderly victims, without getting emotionally invested. I just followed the money. Every semester, I'd search Garrett's name online. His dental practice was thriving. He'd opened a second location. The local newspaper ran a puff piece about his charity work with disadvantaged youth. The comments were full of praise for this pillar of the community. It made me sick. I started keeping a file on him. Every news article, every business registration, every public record. I told myself it was just curiosity, but I was really gathering intelligence, learning his patterns, his associations, his weaknesses. The charity work particularly galled me. Photos showed him smiling with underprivileged children, presenting oversized checks to youth organizations. The local Boys and Girls Club had named their dental clinic after him. He was being celebrated for helping the exact demographic he'd destroyed, vulnerable kids with no advocates. One article mentioned his expansion plans. Dr. Collins hopes to open 5 more locations over the next decade, bringing quality dental care to underserved communities. The reporter described him as passionate about giving back and a true asset to our community. I printed out every article and kept them in a folder labeled Research. My apartment was sparse. I'd never learned to accumulate possessions, but that folder grew thick with documentation of Garrett's public image. By age 25, I was a certified fraud examiner working for a prestigious firm. I'd built a reputation for being thorough, relentless, and completely without mercy when it came to financial criminals. My colleagues called me the Bloodhound. The nickname started after the Pemberton case. Richard Pemberton was a hedge fund manager who'd been stealing from his clients for 8 years. Everyone knew he was dirty, but he was smart and well-connected. 3 different firms had tried to build a case against him and failed. Klein & Associates gave me the file as a test. See what you can find, they said. Don't spend more than 2 weeks on it. I spent 6 months. I traced every transaction, every wire transfer, every cash withdrawal. I found accounts in 12 different countries, shell companies within shell companies, and a money laundering scheme that involved art dealers, yacht purchases, and cryptocurrency exchanges. When I was finished, I had a 400-page report documenting exactly how Pemberton had stolen $47 million from retirement accounts belonging to teachers, firefighters, and nurses. The FBI called it the most comprehensive financial crime investigation they'd ever seen. Pemberton got 22 years in federal prison. His victims recovered 89% of their stolen money. And I got the reputation as someone who could unravel any financial conspiracy, no matter how complex. That's when I decided it was time. I started small. Public record searches revealed Garrett had purchased rental properties across 3 counties. His tax filings showed income that didn't match his practice's reported earnings. Interesting. The property purchases alone were suspicious. How does a small-town dentist afford to buy 17 rental properties in 5 years? His practice served a working-class community where most patients had Medicaid. The profit margins weren't high enough to support that kind of real estate investment. I pulled his business license applications, his loan documents, his insurance filings. I cross-referenced his reported income with his lifestyle. The man was living well beyond his legitimate means. I dug deeper. The state dental board had no record of several continuing education credits he'd claimed. His DEA license had been renewed with forged documentation. His insurance billing showed procedures that never happened, patients who didn't exist. I spent evenings and weekends building the case, working from my laptop in coffee shops and libraries. I used different IP addresses, dummy email accounts, and prepaid credit cards to avoid leaving a digital trail. This had to be perfect. The prescription fraud was extensive. Garrett had been billing insurance companies for hundreds of procedures that never happened. Root canals on patients who'd never been in his office. Crowns on teeth that didn't exist. Oral surgery on children whose parents had never heard of him. But the real money was in the drugs. I found evidence that he was writing prescriptions for phantom patients, then selling the pills to a network of dealers across 3 states. The operation was sophisticated. He used real patient names and insurance information, but the prescriptions were filled at pharmacies where he had connections. I cross-referenced pharmacy logs with patient visits and found hundreds of discrepancies. Patients who'd supposedly received Percocet prescriptions on days when they were verifiably out of state. Kids who'd supposedly needed powerful painkillers for routine cleanings. Elderly patients who were prescribed medications that would be dangerous given their documented health conditions. For 6 months, I built an airtight case. Every falsified document, every phantom patient, every dollar stolen from Medicaid. I cross-referenced prescription logs with patient visits and found hundreds of discrepancies. He was still stealing pills, just like when I was 12. Only now he was selling them to fund his growing real estate empire. The pattern was clear. Garrett would schedule fake appointments with real patients, bill their insurance for expensive procedures, and write prescriptions for powerful painkillers. The patients never knew because they never received the bills. Insurance covered everything. The pharmacies filled the prescriptions because they came from a licensed dentist with a good reputation. The pills went to dealers who sold them on the street. The insurance money went into accounts that Garrett used to buy rental properties. The rental income was then laundered through shell companies to make it look legitimate. The man who destroyed my childhood was running a criminal enterprise worth millions. I documented every aspect of the operation, bank records showing suspicious cash deposits, surveillance footage from pharmacies showing the same few people picking up dozens of prescriptions, phone records linking Garrett to known drug dealers, real estate transactions funded with money that couldn't be explained by his legitimate income. I even found his source inside the state dental board, a clerk named Patricia who'd been altering records in exchange for $5,000 payments. She'd been covering up complaints against Garrett and helping him maintain his clean licensing record. I compiled everything into a detailed report: bank records, pharmacy logs, witness statements from former employees who'd been too scared to speak up. Then I sent copies to the DEA, the State Dental Board, the IRS, and the FBI's white-collar crime unit. Within a week, federal agents raided his practice. I took vacation time just to watch the news coverage from my hotel room. I took vacation time and drove back to my hometown to watch the show. The local news was all over it. Respected dentist arrested in major drug trafficking scheme. I parked across from the practice and watched as they carried out box after box of evidence. Seeing the FBI agents emerge with computers, files, and evidence bags was surreal. This was the office where I'd gone for cleanings as a child, where Garrett had played the role of caring stepfather. Now it was a crime scene. The news crews interviewed shocked neighbors and patients. "He seemed like such a good man," one elderly patient told a reporter. "He always took such good care of my teeth. I can't believe this." A former employee agreed to an on-camera interview with her face obscured. "We all knew something was wrong," she said. Patients would come in angry, saying they'd been billed for procedures they never had, but Dr. Collins would just say it was a computer error. When people tried to complain to the dental board, somehow their complaints would disappear. Garrett was led away in handcuffs, his face red with rage and humiliation. A reporter shoved a microphone in his direction. "Dr. Collins, how do you respond to allegations that you've been selling stolen prescription drugs for over a decade?" "This is a misunderstanding," he stammered. "Someone's trying to frame me. I've dedicated my life to serving this community." I laughed out loud in my car, still playing the victim. His lawyer released a statement later that day claiming the charges were part of a vendetta by disgruntled former employees and jealous competitors. The statement painted Garrett as a hard-working dentist, being persecuted for his success. But that was just the beginning. The investigation revealed the scope of his crimes was staggering. He'd stolen over $3.2 million from insurance companies through fraudulent billing. The prescription drug ring involved 6 employees and generated nearly $800,000 in illegal profits. He'd been forging continuing education certificates for years, putting patients at risk with outdated techniques. The FBI's forensic accountants confirmed every detail of my investigation. If anything, I'd been conservative in my estimates. The actual scope of the fraud was even larger than I'd documented. They found evidence of additional schemes I hadn't discovered. Garrett had been overbilling for dental equipment that was never purchased, claiming reimbursements for community outreach programs that existed only on paper, and even stealing from his own employees' health insurance contributions. The drug dealing operation reached into neighboring states. Garrett had contacts in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia, who were distributing his stolen pills. Some of the drugs ended up being sold to high school students, kids the same age I'd been when he'd destroyed my life. The IRS found he'd hidden assets in offshore accounts. The rental properties were purchased with laundered money from his drug sales. His charity work was a front. He'd been skimming donations meant for underprivileged kids. The charity fraud was particularly sickening. The Boys and Girls Club had raised money to fund dental care for low-income children. Garrett had been billing the organization for services he never provided, then pocketing the payments. The kids who were supposed to receive free dental care never got it. One mother spoke to the news about how her daughter had been on a waiting list for months for supposedly free dental work. Dr. Collins kept saying they were backed up, but that the care was coming, she said. Meanwhile, my little girl was in pain from a cavity that could have been fixed in 20 minutes. Every newspaper article twisted the knife deeper. Local dentist's 15-year crime spree exposed. Trusted community leader faces federal charges. How one man's greed destroyed lives. The headlines were everything I dreamed of. Pillar of community revealed as criminal. Dentist's double life, healer by day, drug dealer by night. How a trusted doctor betrayed an entire town. The community was in shock. Parents pulled their kids from his practice. The dental board revoked his license permanently. His wife, my mother, filed for divorce within 2 weeks of his arrest. I watched my mother's interview on the local news. She looked older, fragile. "I had no idea," she kept saying. "He seemed like such a good man. He was so good with children." The reporter asked about me, the stepdaughter who'd been placed in foster care. Mom's face crumbled. "I failed her," she whispered. "I should have believed her. I should have protected her. It was too little. Too late." The divorce proceedings revealed more of Garrett's deception. He'd been hiding assets from my mother too, maintaining secret accounts and forging her signature on loan documents. She lost the house, the cars, everything. The feds seized it all as proceeds from criminal activity. I should have felt satisfied, but I wanted more. I wanted him to know it was me. I showed up at his arraignment wearing my best suit, sitting in the front row where he couldn't miss me. When his eyes found mine, I saw the exact moment recognition hit. His face went white. He stumbled slightly, grabbing his lawyer's arm for support. His lawyer followed his gaze and saw me sitting calmly in the gallery. They had a whispered conversation before court resumed. During the lunch break, he cornered me in the courthouse hallway. "You," he hissed. "You did this." I smiled calmly. "Did what?" "I'm just a concerned citizen following a public corruption case. Don't play games with me. I know it was you. You're the one who gave them all that information." His lawyer appeared at his elbow, trying to pull him away. "Garrett, we can't discuss this here." But Garrett was past caring about legal strategy. 15 years of rage poured out of him. "You ruined me, destroyed everything I built." "No," I said quietly. You destroyed yourself 15 years ago when you decided to frame a 12-year-old for your crimes. I just made sure everyone finally knew the truth." His hands shook with rage. "You were nothing, a troubled kid from a broken home. Nobody cared about you." People in the hallway were starting to stare. Security guards began moving in our direction. "You're right," I agreed. "Nobody cared about me then, but they care about the truth now. And the truth is, you're a thief, a liar, and a drug dealer who destroyed an innocent child's life to save your own skin." Security guards approached, having noticed the heated conversation. "You'll never prove I framed you," Garrett whispered desperately. "It's your word against mine, and you're just a bitter foster kid with an agenda." I pulled out my phone and showed him a photo. Me at 12 years old, standing next to the foster care caseworker. Hollow eyes, thin frame, clutching a garbage bag of belongings. "I don't need to prove anything," I said. "The internet is very interested in stories about powerful men who destroy children's lives, especially when those children grow up to become the people who bring them down." He lunged at me, but the guards caught him. As they dragged him away, I called out, "See you at sentencing, Garrett." His lawyer apologized profusely as they led Garrett back to the holding area. "He's under tremendous stress," he explained. "This isn't who he really is." I almost laughed. After 15 years, I knew exactly who Garrett really was. The trial was a massacre. Every crime I'd documented came out in excruciating detail. Former employees testified about his threats and intimidation. Patients spoke about unnecessary procedures he'd performed for insurance money. The prosecutor painted a picture of a man so consumed with greed, he'd sacrifice anyone to protect himself. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. They had financial records, pharmacy logs, surveillance footage, and witness testimony from dozens of victims. Garrett's defense team tried to claim he was a victim of employee theft and computer hackers, but the evidence was too comprehensive. One particularly damaging witness was Margaret, Garrett's former dental hygienist. She testified that Garrett had forced her to participate in the billing fraud by threatening to fire her and ruin her career. "He said if I ever talked, he'd make sure I never worked in dentistry again," she said through tears. "He told everyone I was stealing supplies, even though he was the one taking everything. I was a single mother. I couldn't afford to lose my job." Another witness was James, a former drug dealer who'd purchased pills from Garrett's operation. In exchange for a reduced sentence on his own charges, he detailed how the network operated. "Dr. Collins wasn't just selling pills," James testified. "He was teaching other doctors how to set up similar operations. He had a whole system worked out, which insurance companies were easiest to defraud, which pharmacies didn't ask questions, how to create fake patient records." The scope of Garrett's criminal enterprise was staggering. The prosecution showed evidence that he'd been planning to expand into multiple states, franchising his fraud operation to other corrupt medical professionals. My testimony was brief but devastating. I explained how he'd framed me, destroyed my family, and sent me into foster care to cover his drug theft. The jury looked at him with disgust. Taking the stand was surreal. The courtroom was packed with reporters, victims, and community members. I looked directly at Garrett as I spoke, watching his face as I detailed what he'd done to me. "The defendant told everyone I was stealing and selling prescription drugs," I said calmly. "He convinced my mother, my school, and Child Protective Services that I was a dangerous criminal. As a result, I was removed from my home and placed in foster care for 6 years. I described the foster homes, the abuse, the isolation. I explained how his lies had destroyed not just my childhood, but my relationship with my mother and any sense of family I'd ever had." "Why would he do this to you?" the prosecutor asked. "Because the state dental board was investigating missing prescription drugs from his practice. He needed someone to blame, and a 12-year-old girl with no power and no voice was the perfect scapegoat." Garrett's lawyer tried to object, claiming my testimony was prejudicial, but the judge allowed it, noting that the defendant's pattern of targeting vulnerable victims was relevant to sentencing. During cross-examination, Garrett's lawyer tried to portray me as bitter and vengeful. "Isn't it true that you've harbored resentment against Dr. Collins for 15 years? He asked. "Yes," I said simply. "And isn't it true that you used your professional skills to build a case against him? Not because you discovered evidence of wrongdoing, but because you wanted revenge?" I thought carefully before answering. "I used my professional skills to investigate financial irregularities in Dr. Collins's business operations. The fact that this investigation revealed extensive criminal activity was not my fault. It was his. But you specifically targeted him, didn't you? You weren't randomly assigned this case by your employer." "That's correct. I investigated him personally because I knew he was capable of framing innocent people for crimes they didn't commit. I wanted to see what other crimes he might be committing," the lawyer pressed further. "So this was a personal vendetta?" "No," I said firmly. "This was a professional investigation that revealed legitimate criminal activity. If Dr. Collins hadn't been running a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise, there would have been nothing for me to find." "After destroying this young woman's childhood," the prosecutor said in closing arguments, "the defendant continued his criminal enterprise for over a decade, showing complete disregard for the lives he was harming. He sold drugs to dealers who sold them to children. He stole money meant for dental care for underprivileged kids. He corrupted employees and intimidated anyone who tried to stop him." The prosecutor held up the photo of me at 12 years old. "This is what Dr. Collins was willing to do to save himself 15 years ago. The evidence shows he's been willing to harm vulnerable people ever since." The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. The foreman read the verdict on all 37 charges. Conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, healthcare fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, witness intimidation. Every count came back guilty. Garrett's face was stone as the verdicts were read. His wife, my former mother, sobbed in the gallery. His children from his first marriage sat in shocked silence. At sentencing, the judge was brutal. Dr. Collins, you occupied a position of trust in this community. Parents brought their children to you believing you would help them. Instead, you preyed on that trust to fund a criminal empire. Your willingness to destroy a child's life to protect yourself demonstrates a level of callousness that shocks the conscience. The judge detailed each aspect of Garrett's crimes before announcing the sentence. The court has considered the defendant's lack of remorse, his extensive criminal conduct, and his history of targeting vulnerable victims. On the conspiracy charges, 15 years. On the healthcare fraud charges, 12 years consecutive. On the money laundering charges, 8 years consecutive. The sentences kept adding up. When the judge finished, Garrett was facing 57 years in federal prison, 27 years in federal prison, no possibility of parole for the first 15 years. I sat in the back row as they led him away. He turned one last time, his eyes finding mine. I raised my hand in a small wave. After the sentencing, reporters surrounded me in the hallway. Word had leaked that I was the stepdaughter he'd framed, the forensic accountant who'd brought him down. How does it feel to get justice after all these years? One asked. I thought carefully before answering. Justice isn't revenge, I said. Justice is making sure the truth finally comes out. Today, a man who spent decades hurting people finally faced consequences for his actions. That's not revenge. That's just what should have happened 15 years ago. But privately, walking to my car, I felt the satisfaction I'd dreamed about for half my life. Every sleepless night in foster care, every birthday spent alone, every moment of doubt about my own worth, it had all led to this. The local news ran follow-up stories for weeks. Where are they now? Segments about Garrett's victims, investigative pieces about how the dental board had failed to catch him for so long, opinion columns about reforming oversight of medical professionals. One story particularly gratified me. A reporter tracked down my old caseworker, Ms. Hendricks. When asked about my case, she claimed she'd always suspected Garrett was lying. Something about that man never sat right with me, she said. But we have to follow protocol, trust medical professionals. Maybe if I'd pushed harder. The reporter then showed her the evidence I'd compiled, the financial records proving Garrett had been stealing drugs for years before he framed me. Ms. Hendricks went pale. This means that little girl was telling the truth the whole time, she whispered. How does that make you feel? The reporter asked. Ms. Hendricks started crying on camera. It means I failed her. We all failed her. That poor child. The story aired with the headline, System Failed Foster Child Who Grew Up to Expose Her Abuser. The aftermath was swift and complete. Garrett's assets were seized to pay restitution to his victims. The dental practice was shuttered permanently. His reputation was destroyed beyond repair. His former colleagues scrambled to distance themselves from him. The Dental Association removed his name from awards and honors. The Boys and Girls Club took down the plaque naming their clinic after him. The charity fraud victims were particularly vocal. Parents whose children had been denied dental care while Garrett lined his pockets organized protests outside the courthouse. They held signs reading, "Children's pain, Garrett's gain, and he stole from kids." One mother, Maria Santos, became a vocal advocate for reform. Her daughter had needed emergency dental surgery that was delayed for months because Garrett claimed the clinic was backed up with free cases. My little girl suffered for months because this man was stealing money meant for children, she told reporters. While she was in pain, he was buying rental properties with our donations. The insurance companies sued to recover their losses. The state launched an investigation into how Garrett had maintained his license despite multiple complaints. The pharmacy board examined how his prescriptions had been filled without proper oversight. My mother tried to reach out through a mutual acquaintance. She wanted to apologize, to explain that she'd been manipulated too. I declined the meeting. Some wounds are too deep for apologies. The message came through my old teacher, Dr. Chen, who'd stayed in touch over the years. Mom had somehow tracked her down and begged her to facilitate contact. She's devastated, Dr. Chen told me during our call. She keeps saying she should have believed you, should have protected you. She wants a chance to make things right. There's nothing to make right, I replied. She made her choice 15 years ago. I made mine last week. We're even. Dr. Chen was quiet for a moment. Are you sure? She seems genuinely remorseful. I'm sure. Some people get second chances. She used hers when she chose a lying drug dealer over her own daughter. I never heard from my mother again. 6 months later, I received a call from a documentary filmmaker. They wanted to tell my story, how a child victim had grown up to become the instrument of her abuser's justice. I agreed with one condition: any proceeds would go to organizations supporting children in foster care. The filmmaker, Rebecca Walsh, spent months interviewing me, former foster children, child welfare experts, and legal professionals. She gained access to court documents, case files, and even some of my evidence files. The documentary process was therapeutic in unexpected ways. Talking about the foster homes, the isolation, the feeling of powerlessness, it helped me process trauma I'd buried for years. Rebecca interviewed Mrs. Henderson, the foster mother who'd shown me kindness. Now in her 70s, she remembered me clearly. That girl was special, she said. She had this quiet strength, this determination. Even when she was broken, you could see the steel underneath. I'm not surprised she grew up to fight for justice. The documentary also featured other victims of the foster care system who'd been failed by adults who should have protected them. Their stories were heartbreaking but also inspiring, showing how children could survive unthinkable circumstances and emerge stronger. Dr. Chen provided historical context about the failures of child protective services, particularly in cases involving powerful community figures. The system is designed to trust authority figures, she explained. When those figures abuse that trust, vulnerable children pay the price. The documentary aired 2 years later. The Long Game won several awards and brought national attention to how the system fails vulnerable children. I testified before Congress about reforming child protective services. The congressional hearing was intimidating but necessary. I sat at a witness table facing dozens of representatives and senators, many of whom had never heard testimony from someone who'd lived through systemic failure. The current system prioritizes family preservation over child safety, I testified. When a respected community member makes accusations against a powerless child, the system automatically believes the adult. This bias puts vulnerable children at risk. I proposed specific reforms: mandatory background checks for all adults involved in child welfare decisions, independent advocates for children in care, and penalties for caseworkers who failed to properly investigate abuse allegations. Representative Johnson from Texas asked pointed questions about my case. Ms. Parker, if the system had worked correctly, what would have happened differently? Someone would have investigated Garrett's background before believing his accusations. They would have found the evidence of his drug theft. They would have realized that a 12-year-old girl wasn't capable of running a prescription drug operation. And what message do you have for children currently in similar situations? I looked directly into the cameras. The system may fail you, but that doesn't mean you're worthless. The adults who hurt you may seem powerful now, but power shifts. Truth has a way of surfacing eventually. Don't give up. The testimony led to bipartisan legislation improving protections for children in foster care. The bill passed unanimously, one of the few issues Republicans and Democrats could agree on. Garrett tried to appeal his conviction. The appeals court not only upheld the verdict, but criticized the original sentence as too lenient. They noted that his pattern of targeting vulnerable victims, including his own stepdaughter, warranted even harsher punishment. The appeals court decision was scathing. The defendant's willingness to destroy a child's life to cover his own crimes demonstrates a level of depravity that demands the harshest possible sentence. His subsequent criminal conduct shows this was not an isolated incident, but part of a continuing pattern of victimizing the powerless. They added 5 years to his sentence. During the appeal process, more victims came forward. Former patients who'd been afraid to speak, employees he'd threatened into silence, even family members who'd suffered his abuse. The FBI opened additional investigations. One particularly disturbing case involved a dental assistant named Jennifer, who'd worked for Garrett in the early 2000s. She testified that he'd sexually harassed her for months, threatening to ruin her career if she reported him. He told me I was just like his stepdaughter, a troublemaker who nobody would believe, Jennifer said. He said if I caused problems, he'd make sure everyone knew I was stealing drugs, just like he'd done to her. The pattern was clear. Garrett had been using the same playbook for years, targeting vulnerable people, then threatening to frame them if they spoke out. I wasn't his only victim. I was just the first one who eventually gained the power to fight back. Other dental professionals came forward with stories of Garrett's attempts to recruit them into his fraud schemes. Dr. Peterson, a former colleague, testified that Garrett had approached him about maximizing insurance reimbursements through creative billing. When I refused, he threatened to report me to the dental board for imaginary violations, Dr. Peterson said. He had connections there, people who would back up whatever lies he told. The corruption extended deeper than anyone had imagined. Garrett had built a network of corrupt officials, intimidated employees, and frightened competitors into silence. His crime spree had lasted 15 years not because he was clever, but because he was ruthless enough to destroy anyone who threatened him. I was contacted by a prosecutor in another state. They'd found evidence Garrett had been running similar schemes at conferences he'd attended. The financial records I'd compiled became the blueprint for a multi-state investigation. The conferences were continuing education events where dentists learned new techniques and maintained their licenses. Garrett had been using them to network with other corrupt professionals, teaching them his methods for insurance fraud and prescription theft. Prosecutors in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia opened cases based on evidence found in Garrett's files. His operation had been much larger than anyone realized, a franchise system for medical fraud. 3 years into his sentence, Garrett was indicted on additional charges in 4 other states. Each conviction added more time to his sentence. What had started as 27 years became life without parole. Watching him being transported between courthouses in shackles was surreal. This man who'd once commanded respect and fear was now just another number in the federal prison system. He aged rapidly in prison. Photos from his court appearances showed a broken man, gray and frail. The powerful dentist who'd once commanded respect was now just another number in the federal system. Prison was not kind to him. Word spread that he was a child abuser who'd destroyed families for money. Even among criminals, there are lines that shouldn't be crossed. I received updates from prosecutors about his conditions. He'd been placed in protective custody after threats from other inmates. His health was declining rapidly: diabetes, heart problems, depression. He'd lost over 60 pounds and developed a persistent cough. I followed his case obsessively for the first few years, then gradually let it go. My life moved forward. I started my own forensic accounting firm, specializing in cases involving vulnerable victims. My client base grew to include victims' rights organizations, whistleblowers, and others seeking justice against powerful abusers. The firm, Parker & Associates, quickly gained a reputation for taking on cases other firms wouldn't touch. We represented foster children suing abusive institutions, elderly victims of financial fraud, and whistleblowers exposing corporate corruption. My team included other professionals who'd overcome difficult childhoods. My partner, David Kim, had grown up in poverty and put himself through law school. Our lead investigator, Sandra Martinez, was a former police detective who'd left the force after exposing corruption in her department. We understood what it felt like to be powerless against corrupt systems, That shared experience made us incredibly effective advocates for victims. One of our biggest cases involved a network of group homes that were abusing foster children while billing the state millions for therapeutic services. The investigation took 2 years, but we ultimately exposed a fraud scheme that reached into multiple states. "You saved those kids," David said after the convictions were announced. "Without your work, they'd still be suffering." "We saved them," I corrected. "And we only could because someone saved me first, even if I had to save myself." Our success led to more referrals, bigger cases, national attention. We were featured in legal journals, invited to speak at conferences, consulted by law enforcement agencies. The firm that had started as my personal mission became a powerful force for justice. 10 years after Garrett's conviction, I received an unexpected call. A prison chaplain said Garrett was dying of cancer and wanted to speak with me. He claimed he wanted to make amends. I almost hung up. The chaplain, Father Murphy, was persistent. "He's very sick," he said. "Maybe a month left. He says there are things he needs to tell you, things that might help other victims." The curiosity was killing me. What could he possibly say after all these years? What other victims was he talking about? But curiosity won. I drove to the federal penitentiary on a cold Tuesday morning. The man they brought to the visiting room bore little resemblance to the confident dentist who destroyed my childhood. Cancer had ravaged his body. His once perfect teeth were now yellowed and broken. He sat across from me, shackled and wearing a prison uniform that hung loose on his skeletal frame. His hands shook as he tried to drink from a paper cup of water. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. I said nothing, just studied his face for signs of the man who terrorized my childhood. He was barely recognizable. "I'm dying," he continued. "The doctors say I have maybe 2 months." Still nothing from me. "I wanted to tell you I'm sorry for what I did to you, for the lies I told, for ruining your childhood." I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation, but all I saw was a broken old man facing death. "Are you sorry you did it?" I asked. "Or sorry you got caught?" He was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer carefully. "Both," he admitted, "but mostly sorry I did it. I was so afraid of losing everything that I destroyed an innocent child's life. That's not something a human being should do." "No," I agreed. "It's not. I know you can't forgive me. I wouldn't forgive me either. But I needed you to know that I know what I did was evil, and I'm glad you stopped me before I hurt more people." There was something different about this apology. It wasn't self-serving or manipulative. He wasn't asking for forgiveness or trying to make himself feel better. He was simply acknowledging the truth. "There were others," he continued. "Before you, after you. I threatened other employees the same way. Used the same tactics to silence people who might expose me." He told me about Jennifer, the dental assistant who'd later testified against him, about Dr. Peterson and the other professionals he'd intimidated, about patients who'd complained and been silenced through threats and manipulation. "I had a whole system," he said quietly. "Find someone vulnerable, compromise them, then use their vulnerability to control them. You were just the first one I'd practiced on." I looked at this dying man who'd shaped so much of my life through his cruelty. "Why tell me this now?" I asked. "Because you're the only one who ever fought back," he said. "You're the only one who had the strength to stand up to me. I thought if anyone deserved to know the full truth, it was you." He coughed violently, specks of blood appearing on his lips. "I don't forgive you," I said finally. "But I don't hate you anymore either. Hate was useful when I needed motivation to bring you down. Now it's just dead weight." He nodded. "I understand." I stood to leave. "Can I ask you something?" he said. I paused. "How did you do it? How did you survive what I put you through and become this?" He gestured weakly, encompassing who I'd become. I thought about the question. "You taught me something valuable," I said. "You taught me that the system protects powerful people who hurt others. So I decided to become powerful enough to fix the system." He stared at me for a long moment. "I created my own destruction, didn't I?" "Yes," I said simply. "You did." I walked away without looking back. Garrett died 6 weeks later. The obituary was 3 lines in the local paper. No funeral service was held. I didn't attend. Instead, I was at my office working on a case involving a corporate executive who'd been embezzling from a children's charity. The patterns were familiar. Powerful person, vulnerable victims, system failing to protect the innocent. The executive, Thomas Wright, had been stealing from the Make-A-Wish Foundation for terminally ill children. He'd created fake administrative costs, inflated vendor bills, and diverted donations meant for dying kids into his personal accounts. The investigation was complex. Wright had been careful to hide his tracks through shell companies and offshore accounts. But I'd seen these patterns before. The methodology wasn't much different from what Garrett had done. "He's using the same playbook," I told my team during a case review. "Create fake expenses, manipulate vendors, intimidate anyone who asks questions. These guys all think they're the first person to discover financial fraud." Sandra pulled up Wright's employment history. "Look at this. He's worked for 4 different charities over the past decade, and each one reported financial irregularities after he left." David reviewed the legal options. "If we can prove pattern and practice, we can get him on RICO charges. That's 20 years minimum." We'd been building cases like this for years now. The methodology was always similar. Find the money trail, identify the victims, document the pattern of abuse, then present an overwhelming case to prosecutors. Some people might call what I do revenge, but it's not. Revenge is personal satisfaction from someone else's suffering. What I do is justice, using the skills I developed through suffering to protect others from going through what I experienced. Every criminal I expose, every victim I help get justice, every corrupt system I help reform, it's all connected to that 12-year-old girl who was failed by everyone who should have protected her. The foster care experience that was meant to break me instead forged me into someone unbreakable. The isolation taught me self-reliance. The injustice gave me an unshakable moral compass. The pain motivated me to ensure others wouldn't face the same betrayal. Garrett thought he was destroying my life when he framed me. Instead, he created the very person who would one day destroy him. The child he sacrificed to save himself became the woman who ensured he'd never hurt another child again. The irony wasn't lost on me. If Garrett had simply admitted to his drug theft 15 years ago, he would have faced a few years in prison and been able to rebuild his life. Instead, his decision to destroy an innocent child to save himself led to his complete destruction. He traded a manageable problem for an insurmountable enemy. The 12-year-old girl he'd terrorized had grown up to become the one person with the skills, motivation, and resources to expose every crime he'd ever committed. That's not revenge. That's poetry. My firm now handles dozens of cases each year. We've recovered millions in stolen funds and sent scores of white-collar criminals to prison. We've helped reform laws protecting whistleblowers and victims of financial crimes. The Thomas Wright case concluded with his conviction on 17 felony counts. He was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $4.2 million in restitution. The money went back to the Make-A-Wish Foundation, funding wishes for children who might otherwise have been forgotten. After Wright's sentencing, I received a thank you card from the family of a little girl who'd received her wish, a trip to Disney World, because of the recovered funds. The card had a photo of her smiling with Mickey Mouse, her bald head covered by a princess tiara. I keep a photo on my desk, not of Garrett being arrested, but of a little girl I helped recently. Her father had been embezzling from her college fund to support a gambling addiction. When she discovered the theft, he tried to blame her, claiming she'd hacked his accounts. Sound familiar? But this time, the child had someone who believed her, someone who knew exactly how to prove her innocence and expose her father's crimes, someone who'd spent years learning to fight for kids who couldn't fight for themselves. Her name was Ashley, and she was 13, almost the same age I'd been when my world fell apart. Her father, Michael, was a respected accountant who'd been stealing from multiple clients to fund his casino trips. When Ashley noticed money missing from the college account she'd been tracking online, Michael panicked. He couldn't admit to his gambling addiction, so he claimed Ashley had somehow accessed the account and stolen the money herself. She's been acting out lately, he told his wife, getting into computers, learning about hacking from her friends. I think she thought she could steal the money and we wouldn't notice. Ashley's mother brought her to my firm after the family lawyer suggested involving law enforcement. I don't think my daughter would steal, she said, but I need to know for sure. I spent an hour talking to Ashley and immediately recognized the signs. The confusion, the hurt, the desperate need to be believed. She reminded me so much of myself at that age. I didn't take any money, she kept saying. I don't even know how to do what Dad says I did. I just checked the balance online like he taught me. The financial investigation took 3 weeks. Michael had been careful, but not careful enough. The casino withdrawals were clearly documented. The timeline showed the money disappearing on days when Ashley was at school or with friends. More importantly, I found evidence that Michael had been stealing from his clients for over 2 years. Ashley's college fund was just one of many accounts he'd raided to fund his addiction. When I presented the evidence to the family, Michael broke down and confessed. The relief on Ashley's face was identical to what I'd felt when Garrett was finally exposed. You believed me, she said through tears. You actually believed me. I looked at that girl's relieved face after her father's conviction and saw my 12-year-old self. But this time, the story ended differently. This time, the child was protected. This time, justice won. That's when I realized the revenge was complete. Not because Garrett suffered, though he did, but because I'd transformed my suffering into protection for others. I'd taken the worst thing that ever happened to me and turned it into the best thing I could do for others. Ashley went on to college with her fund restored and additional scholarships our firm helped her secure. She studied criminal justice and now works for the FBI's white-collar crime unit. She sends me updates every year, usually around the anniversary of her father's confession. Thank you for believing a kid when no adult would, her last card read. I'm going to spend my career making sure other kids don't go through what we did. The cycle continues. The children we save grow up to save other children. The system slowly improves because each generation learns from the failures of the previous one. 15 years of planning, investigating, and executing justice. It was everything I'd imagined it would be. But more than that, it was everything that 12-year-old girl deserved it to be. The scared, abandoned child who was failed by every adult in her life had grown up to become the adult who never fails vulnerable children. The girl who was silenced had found her voice. The victim had become the protector. And the man who thought he could destroy a powerless child learned what happens when that child grows up to have all the power. I waited 15 years to get my revenge, and it was everything I imagined it to be. But the real victory wasn't destroying him. It was becoming someone worth becoming despite him. And that story, that transformation from victim to victor, continues every day in my work, in every case I take, in every corrupt person I expose, and in every vulnerable person I protect. The 12-year-old girl who was betrayed by the system became the woman who fixed it. That's not just revenge.